There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with making the entire world laugh. It is the loneliness of the performer who steps off the stage, removes the costume, and finds that the person standing in the dressing room mirror is a stranger, quieter, more fragile, and far less certain than the character the audience just adored. For Rowan Atkinson, that loneliness was not a passing feeling. It was the background noise of his entire life. And now, at 70 years old, the man behind the world's most beloved silent comedian is finally speaking, not through rubber-faced expressions or perfectly timed physical gags, but through honest, uncomfortable truth. The world knows Mr. Bean. They know the battered Minnie, the worn teddy bear, the hotel rooms turned into disaster zones, and the face that could communicate an entire emotional breakdown without uttering a single word. What the world did not know, what Rowan Atkinson spent decades carefully concealing, was how much it cost him to become that character. Every episode, every scene, every laugh that echoed across 245 countries came with a price that only he paid, alone, long after the cameras stopped rolling. To understand what Rowan Atkinson has finally confirmed, you have to go back to the very beginning. Not to Oxford, not to the Edinburgh Fringe, but to a school playground in County Durham, England, where a small, wide-eyed boy could not speak without his words crumbling in his mouth. Rowan Sebastian Atkinson was born on January 6, 1955, in Consett, a quiet industrial town in the north of England. He was the youngest of 4 boys, raised on a family farm where discipline and order shaped everyday life. But even within that structured world, Rowan carried something that set him apart, a severe stutter that made ordinary conversation feel like climbing a steep hill barefoot. By the time he reached Durham Chorister School, the stutter had become the defining fact of his childhood. Teachers remembered him as unusually shy. Classmates were far less kind. The mocking was relentless. Some called him names. Some called him an alien, an irony that would follow him all the way into television legend decades later. Among those classmates was a young Tony Blair, who would later recall how brutal that environment could be for a boy who struggled to speak. For Rowan, every school day was an exercise in survival. But something extraordinary happened whenever he stepped onto a stage. The stutter vanished. Completely. As though the act of becoming someone else, anyone else, freed his tongue and unlocked a version of himself that had no difficulty, no shame, and no fear. This was not a small discovery. This was the discovery that shaped everything. Performing was not just something he enjoyed. It was the only place where he could exist without pain. Rowan went on to excel academically, earning top marks in science and eventually graduating in electrical and electronic engineering from Newcastle University in 1975. He continued to Oxford for a master's degree, and for a while, it seemed entirely possible that the world would lose one of its greatest comedic minds to circuit boards and technical manuals. His professors saw a competent, unremarkable student. Nobody in a lecture hall could have predicted what was about to happen. Because at Oxford, Rowan discovered the stage again. He joined the Drama Society and fell in with a group of creatively restless students, including a young writer named Richard Curtis. When Rowan performed, really performed, the room changed. A quiet, awkward young man became something almost otherworldly. His physical control was unlike anything his peers had witnessed. His face alone told stories. Entire emotional landscapes crossed his expression in seconds. The audience at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 1976 experienced this firsthand, and the reaction was the same everywhere. Stunned silence, followed by eruption. Engineering was left behind. Not dramatically, not with a grand announcement, but quietly and inevitably, the way a river always finds its natural course. By the late 1970s, Rowan was pursuing comedy with the same intensity he had once applied to academic study, except this time, the motivation was not a grade or a qualification. It was survival. The early years of his professional career were far from triumphant. Between 1978 and 1979, the BBC rejected him repeatedly. Executives did not understand his style. Auditions were nightmares because the moment Rowan had to be himself, had to speak as Rowan Atkinson rather than as a character, the stutter returned. Rejection piled on rejection. He considered abandoning the whole pursuit and returning to engineering. The man who would one day perform for 900 million people at the London Olympics sat in uncertainty, wondering if he had any future at all. But he kept noticing that pattern. In character, he was fluent. As himself, he struggled. So he made a decision that was both deeply practical and quietly revolutionary. He would let the characters do all the talking. He would disappear so completely into performance that there would be no Rowan Atkinson left to stutter, to fail an audition, or to feel inadequate. This was the birth of his creative philosophy, and the origin of the invisible burden he would carry for the next 4 decades. By 1980, the BBC gave him his first real television platform with Not the 9 o'clock news. Critics savaged the first series. One described it as the worst half-hour of television ever made. But the BBC controller, against all logic, ordered a second series. That second series changed everything. Working alongside Mel Smith, Griff Rhys-Jones, and Pamela Stephenson, Rowan began demonstrating a comedic range that British television had not seen before. A sketch involving a gorilla suit, now legendary in the history of British comedy, turned him into a national figure almost overnight. But beneath the recognition, the anxiety never left. It simply found new expressions. The pressure of live performance, the relentless pace of television production, and the psychological weight of always being the funniest person in the room quietly took their toll. When Not the 9 o'clock news ended in 1982, it was not because the ratings had collapsed.